Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner, an essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free at achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Jayson Weingarten from Ivy Coach back on the show. Jayson, I'd love if you could introduce yourself for the people who haven't heard you yet.
Yeah, it's great to be back on the show. My name is Jayson, and I am with Ivy Coach. With Ivy Coach, I'm a senior admissions consultant, and I've been in the world of highly selective college admissions for more than a decade, starting with professional admissions experience at the University of Pennsylvania. But now I've transitioned to the other side of the desk, helping students and applicants earn admission to our nation's most highly selective schools and programs.
Yeah, fantastic. And so let's chat about, you mentioned you have a lot of experience with people applying to top programs. That's what we want to cover today, right? I think that basically it's a maybe an assumption of mine, but I feel like this is true based on my other conversations on this podcast. I think that there is a huge difference if you're applying to graduate school and or business school, or if you're applying to one of the top 10. Right? I think that it goes from being kind of like a put together a good application and, try to work your connections in that school to like, oh, this is basically just as hard as undergraduate admissions is and just as unlikely. So I'm
right.
curious sort of what tips you have for people applying to like the tippy top programs, right? Like the Stanfords and the Harvards and all those things.
Great. So, first, maybe what does it mean to be one of the top schools? I think that, this time of year, especially, as you're looking into schools, there's going to be rankings and ratings. Everyone, from the different presses, newspapers that you read to your Aunt Tippy, everyone's got their own sense of like what's the best school. And so, what do we mean by the top school? The top schools, we mean these are schools that have low acceptance rates. They have single digit, low teen acceptance rates. These are schools that have the highest academic standards. They have the strong brand reputation, not because they're playing football on Saturday or they make an appearance or run for it every March, but these are schools that, really rest on the laurels of their academics as the kind of point of their reputation. Uh, Typically these are schools that are drawing top applicants from across the country and around the world, as opposed to
Right.
having a little bit more of a regional flair. And as a result, the places that students go from these top schools are really going to be national or international opportunities, as opposed to maybe more state or regional opportunities. And so, what we're going to talk about is going to be applicable to any of these top schools. It's not necessarily going to be limited to just, the Ivy League schools, or it's just not going to be limited to only the M7 graduate programs, or it's not necessarily going to be limited to just, Stanford Law. These are going to be tips, tricks, observances that are applicable to any highly selective school.
Great. Yeah, so then I think that all sounds really good. How do you want to start this?
So, starting at the beginning, always a good place to start. I would say across the board, you're going to want to start earlier than you might want to start with a lot of other programs. You're right that, when it comes to these top schools, you tend to think that they're going to be looking for a little bit more, a little bit extra. There's something a little different going on. You're right. There's, they kind of have higher expectations is the way that I would put it. They don't necessarily require anything wholly different than what the, kind of less selective schools, maybe schools that are kind of the highly selective but not the kind of ultra highly selective tier, are going to require, but they're going to have kind of greater expectations. And so starting early, I think, is key because it's just going to take a little bit more time and energy to ensure that you have the good extracurricular kind of leadership, to make sure that you give yourself the time to be able to get those high GRE, GMAT, MCAT, LSAT scores, that you're going to be able
Uh-huh.
to have the opportunity to really piece together and to go out and get the ingredients for what is going to be a strong application. So I think that that is one thing that is key.
Yeah,
How
I
early
actually
to?
before you move on, are you about are you about to answer this? I was gonna say,
Mhm.
what does early mean?
Yeah. So early, if you're looking to apply to a school that has a deadline in the fall, maybe it's a September deadline, October, November deadline. I think you really need to start really thinking about putting that best foot forward up to 12 months in advance. And so if you are thinking about applying to a school fall of 2024, you really want to start thinking about it and putting forward that best effort starting fall of 2023. That's going to give you the time to go from 0 to 60, having no test prep, having not visited
Mhm.
any program, having not thought about the components that are going to go into your application, the story that you're going to tell. That's going to give you enough time to really go forward and do that.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, then tell me, like, sort of in general, we're talking right about wanting to start kind of a year out, and this is means that this is an intentional decision, right? Like, I think, if you're kind of reactionary, like, oh, I just got laid off and maybe I should go to grad school, which is like a pretty decent move in
Hmm.
with the sort of job market the way that it is. It maybe you don't only apply to these highly selective schools and you include some other ones, just because it's a little difficult. But when you're like, okay, I'm on a mission to go to Harvard or wherever, um, what are the other things that you should be trying to get ahead of, right? So you've got a year, and while GRE or GMAT or LSAT or MCAT prep can take a long time, it often is something that you kind of run as like a parallel process in the background, right? Like you're studying 2, 5, 10 hours a week, and then you're also going to be working on like the other parts of your application in parallel. What are the other things that you should start to consider pretty quickly, like appointments that you need to book or like things that you want to get ahead of, and yeah, things like that.
So I would say that the different kind of visit opportunities, whether it is you as the applicant going to visit the school or the
Hmm.
school doing their kind of regional roadshow, those are opportunities that you're going to want to mark out ahead of time. Typically the top schools are going to be on the road less. They don't need to go to all of the different fairs and the expos in order for people to learn about them. Who has not heard about Harvard Business School?
Yeah,
Everyone knows about Harvard Business School. They don't need to go and allocate the resources that they have towards their marketing budget to put someone on a plane and fly them to the hotel ballroom and have them stand there. And so you're going to have far fewer of these opportunities with the top schools to be able to meet with someone. And so given that there's going to be fewer of those opportunities, you definitely want to be aware of when those opportunities are, either because they're coming to your city or your region, or maybe you're going to have to drive the next town over in order to meet with someone. And so coming up with the list of schools and that are on that target list, and having an idea of when and where you're going to be able to meet with the different individuals either in your town or on their campus, is going to be important. And I'd also say, as you put it, you should not only be applying to these top schools. That's right. You should not only be visiting these top schools. Again, some of them just don't have the opportunity to meet with them, or it happens so infrequently, I think it's perfectly good to go on a tour or visit a school that maybe you have like zero interest in, not because, it's going to convince you that you should apply, but rather so that you can kind of look at, well, what is it about this school that I'm just not interested in? Or you can start to kind
Right.
of build that muscle. If you go to a, random school early in the process, you can kind of get a feel for what the campus visit is. You can kind of get a sense of how that works. You don't want the first time that you're talking with an admissions representative to be, your number one choice. You want to warm up in the bullpen, so to speak. You don't want to come to the
Yeah.
game cold.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also in general, right, like, if you set up your whole life around going to grad school and then you like don't get in to some of the places that you want to go, it is like, I mean, safety school sounds so derogatory,
Hmm.
but like so many of these especially graduate schools have fantastic programs even if they're not something that is necessarily a name brand, right? So it's always good to have a plan, because if you're kind of telling your boss, your coworkers, like, hey, I'm applying to these business schools, and you don't get into any of them, well, that can sometimes be really awkward with your
Hmm.
job, or things like that. Um, and then also, yeah, I like your idea of practicing early. I mean, I think, do you recommend just like doing that kind of regardless, like attending a few info sessions from different places or things like that, just to kind of get a little bit of reps with that whole like schmoozing and that whole thing?
I do. Now, is it going to be like a full time, extracurricular? Is this going to be a hobby for someone? No, I don't think that
Yeah,
that's the
like a
goal
couple
here.
of these.
Yeah, but not everyone is used to networking. Not everyone has a job where they have to be, talking with people or doing sales or something like that. And so it can be very unnatural for people to be doing this. And so when it comes to, practicing, the first time that you would sit for the GRE, hopefully is not the first real deal GRE when you go in with your number two pencils in hand, or you're ready to click on the mouse now that's digital, right? You don't want the
Yeah.
first time that you talk with someone to be when it really counts. And so just as you would take a few, practice tests before you take the real test, you should take a practice visit before you have the real visit.
Right. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Well, so then what are the other things that you want to start getting ahead of early, other than just those visits?
So getting ahead for the visits, all those opportunities is key, just because, again, there's going to be fewer of those opportunities. Another thing that you kind of need to get ahead of, I would say, is what your demonstrated leadership is. Now, this could be
Mm,
at your employer, this could be at your college if you're still an undergrad, this can be in community if you're doing something, working with some sort of organization, nonprofit, or something like that. It takes time to get into a position of either leadership or impact. You can't just show up and be the head of a group or a vice president of a group. It takes time to kind of grow to that role of responsibility. And so
hmm
being able to have the time to dedicate to one of these pursuits so that you can demonstrate leadership in that outside of professional working world, that takes time, and so we definitely do need to start thinking about that a bit early if that's something that has not necessarily been part of what you've been up to for the past however long.
Right. Yeah, I mean, arguably, it's even hard to get into a leadership position in 1 year,
Mhm.
right? So it's almost like hopefully you've already kind of got those things going a little bit.
That's right. Hopefully you've been, attending, you've been around, you're aware of it. You're not just, cracking open Google and searching for, opportunity near me. Hopefully you've already, have an idea of what's around and kind of, been a part of it a little bit. So that way, when you're the one who raises your hand, people are not wondering, well, who's that? Hopefully when you're raising your hand, they know, oh, I know who that is, and they can kind of bring you into the fold.
Yeah. And then beyond that, what else are sort of some areas that you should be starting to think about early?
So another thing I think is important to think about early is to start brainstorming on what your brand is, what your hook is, what your story is, why a school is going to pick you. No doubt these top schools get tens of thousands of applications. They are able to have the pick of the litter. Really figuring out, what is that unique differentiating thing about you, that unique way that you're going to make an impact in the world or your world, your industry. I think that is key. Now, I'm not talking about sitting down brainstorming for the essays or starting to write the essays a year in advance. I don't think that's the case, and sometimes these essays change year to year. But I do think that it's important to think about, well, of all of the, regional sales managers, of all of the, analysts at a, top accounting firm, of all of the different people who have the same banking job and research associate position, what is it about me that is going to be different, that's going to help me stand out from my competition in the application pool, um, and having your really being critical about that, really being thoughtful about that, so that you're able to then figure out, well, if it's if I'm going to tell this differentiated story, what are the elements, the data, the proof, the evidence that I need to have under my belt to be able to prove that. That's you need to think of it in advance so that you can then give yourself the time, the year or so, to be able to go out and do those things, to be able to get those types of opportunities under your belt.
Got it. Yeah. And then I think also it's probably good you're thinking about all this stuff, right? And you're all I think you're kind of circling around this sort of general concept of like what is your story going to be? Right? Cuz at the end of the day when you're applying to any school but especially graduate school, you kind of you can't just be like, "Hey, I get good grades and I did some clubs." And I check the boxes, let me in. Like you've got to kind of have like what's your raison d'etre for being and what's your mission in life and how are you going to change the world and all that stuff, right?
That's right. And the way that I would say it is that it's you know definitely less so about the past superlative achievement, but it's a lot more about the future potential that you're
Mm-hmm.
going to give. If you're all about your past achievement, then maybe you've already peaked. Maybe you are the best that you're ever going to be, and you're not going to be able to improve. And so, why would a highly selective school want to take you? Right? That's like a sports team, taking in an all-star who's on their decline. You're the all-star, and now you're going to regress to the mean. And geez, I wouldn't want my favorite sports team to pick that athlete. You want to
Yep.
show that you have future potential, that you have future promise. And so it's less about superlatives. I got the highest grade. I was number one in this competition. I was the fastest, the first, any of those kind of superlatives. It's far less about those superlatives. And it's a lot more about the passion, the meaning, the impact, to be able to show that you're someone who's going to be able to bring great honor, great prestige. You're going to be able to shine that warm glow onto the upcoming schools, that you're going to think about. And, if you look at, um, you know, examples from who is out there currently that's having success now. Very rarely are these people that had some sort of superlative achievement that you could point to as, well, that's the reason why they got in. Because of this one specific thing that they did. That's why they got in, went to the school, and now they are like a Supreme Court justice, right? I mean, yes, it is true
Right.
that if you look at the 9 Supreme Court justices, it's only it's only Justice Barrett that did not go to Yale or Harvard or one of the top schools. She went to Notre Dame, which certainly is a great school. But you know, all of the other Supreme Court justices, I don't think that they, if you look back at their application at the time, that you would be able to point to this like one superlative achievement that they did in college when they were applying. That would be like, okay, well, that one thing, that's the reason that they got in. And so it takes
Right.
time to cultivate this overall brand, this overall story, rather than, trying to win one thing that is going to like confer admission. The admissions officers, they're not coronating kings and queens. They are not rewarding students for a job well done. They are providing the university with an input, and that input needs to be the best new crop of students that are going to change the world, that are going to bring great honor, prestige, all of that back to the school in the generation to come.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also why it's so important to have a vision for yourself, right? I think that if you don't have it, it's almost disqualifying. Even if your vision might be something like, I don't know, if I were to apply to grad school like 5 years ago, it might have been like, I want to, change the way that people prepare for tests and like make it a simpler, easier process that's more straightforward. And like, I don't know, I don't feel like tons of people get up every day and are excited about that necessarily. um but it's important that you have that and that you're focused on it, right? It'd
Mhm.
be very different if you were just kind of like, yeah, I just really am doing this thing because it's a job, and then I'm looking to get a better job that pays me more after the fact.
Yeah, that's right. And I'd also say that, one of the biggest differences between graduate school and undergrad is that undergrad is, 4 years. There's time. You can sit under the oak tree in the quad and you can ponder life and you can take, a broad range of courses and you can, be reflective about the great questions of life and humanity. Grad school, medical school is 4 years. That's pretty much it. Law school's three, MBA programs are two. There's some 1.5 and 1 year programs. Most of the other, non-pre-professional graduate programs are 1.5 or 2 years. You don't have the time to sit under the oak tree in the quad. Yes, everyone should, take the time to do that, but you're not going to have the time to come in kind of undecided, unsure about the direction of your life. You're also not a teenager anymore. When you're applying to undergrad, you're a teenager. Maybe you've not had the maturity to be introspective about what you're good at, what you like, and all of that. If
Right.
you're now a young adult, you're a young professional, you're in your 20s, and you think that, and you're mature enough to think that you should be going to one of our nation's most highly selective programs, you should also be mature enough to have been introspective about what it is that you want to do, why you're going to go to school for another few years. You're going to spend another tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on education. And to not have a clear reason, a clear story about why that is, that's very frightening for admissions officers. These are not, these places don't get the monikers of being ivory tower and very conservative places, by virtue of anything other than they don't like risk. If it seems like you're going to need a lot of advising and a lot of help to find your direction, yes, these schools do have advising, and yes, they have those programs, but they don't want to have to use them for everyone. They want to have them as that
Mhm.
safety net underneath you. They don't want to know that you're going to come in and instantly have to go through the entire career counseling program. And so being able to have that clear story about, how you're looking to change the world and what you're going to do and all of that, that's helpful to de-risk yourself in terms of giving a sense to these schools that, yes, you are a mature introspective person that does have direction, that does know what you want to do in life, so that you can come in and graduate 2 or 3 years later and be able to go on and go on your way and do great things.
Right, which is like that's sort of what you're touching on is like the core reason behind all the stuff that we've talked about, right? Like the reason why you want to have a leadership position in a relevant club is not because they want you to like have a scoreboard, but because they want to feel like you're going to take leadership positions in future related activities and clubs, right? Like things like that.
Exactly. Past performance is the best indicator of future performance. If you're someone who is able to quickly get involved and make a big impact in a small organization at your school, in your town, at your employer, then you're someone who's likely going to be able to make an impact when you get involved on a bigger stage later in life. And so that's definitely the thinking there. Similarly, if you're someone who has good grades and good test scores, you know what? You're probably going to be able to do the academic work because past performance is the best indicator of future performance.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So then let's I want to talk a bit about how, like, just as you're applying to these top programs, what are some other ways that you can start to basically like get ahead of, but like get really like the other pieces of your application really shining, right? Like I think one of them is definitely essays, and then
hmm
just like networking in general. I feel like those are two other areas that if you start early, you can get kind of a head start.
So when it comes to essays, you definitely do want to give yourself enough time. You don't want to be starting to write your essays for these schools a week in advance. You don't want to be hitting submit at 11:59. You want to give yourself the time to be able to incorporate what you hear from the admissions representatives that you might meet, what you hear from local alumni that have recently gone there and graduated from those programs, what you hear from current students. You want to give yourself enough time to incorporate those items into essays, as well as you want to give yourself enough time to be able to go through and go back and continually update and refine what your story is and how you're telling your story. I think that is a key part of the essays. The standard essay writing, practice, that still holds true. Being able to go through and outline, to flesh it in, to go back and revise. I think that's all good best practice. That there's other episodes that go into a lot more detail on that. I do
Hmm.
think, when it comes to networking with alumni, and kind of alumni, I mean maybe current students who are at a program, and also recent alumni that have just graduated from that program. If someone went to a
Hmm.
program like 50 years ago, they're maybe going to be less helpful. But someone who's just gone to that school or who's still at that school is going to be a lot more helpful. They're going to be able to let you know if you are, talking about things in the way that people talk about these things at those schools. Do people really call it, such and such hall, or do they just, kind of colloquially call it to, such hall? I remember there was one time a student was writing an essay and they misspelled the name of the dean. The dean had kind of a funny
Hmm.
spelling of their name. And, just by showing the essay and saying, hey, I like that we've been talking and, I'm applying to the school and here's what I've written. Just, give me your thoughts. You're not asking for, a lot of proofing and editing. But someone says, oh, hey, this was a really thoughtful essay. But you know what? The dean, he spells his name with two N's, not one N. So you might want to change that. That's kind of a helpful catch that maybe only someone who's in the soup is going to be able to really catch. And so I think that it's definitely helpful to start to understand and get connected with individuals ahead of time, so that when you do have an ask of them, can you put in the good word? Can you read my essay? Can you give me a sense of am I on the right track? That you're able to do so and get back some thoughtful feedback in a timely manner. You don't want to send someone an essay, the week of the deadline and say, hey, can you please give me back this, your thoughts today because I need to edit it ahead of submitting it tomorrow. That's not giving anyone
Yeah.
enough time. And, that kind of saving no time, that doesn't make you look good. And that's probably correlated with some other.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think you have to remember that all these people are generally very busy at this point,
hmm
right? Like, I mean, in college, for better or for worse, your high school teachers or whoever you got your essays from had a little, they like felt a little bit of an obligation to do it, right? Because
hmm
like it's a big part of the college admissions process. But if you're asking a mentor from work to do an essay for you for graduate school, they don't necessarily have the same obligation.
hmm
And so you've got to make it easy on them.
hmm And
And
especially with
particularly
the
if you want to
letters
have
of
multiple rounds of
recommendation.
revision.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially with letters of recommendation. Is there anything else that you can do to get prepared? And all, like just like for all the other aspects, right? Like the interview process and just like other like even building your school list. Like, what are some other things you can kind of do um to get like ahead of this process and get prepared early?
So I keep coming back to the idea that you want to give yourself enough time. That is going to, de-stress the process a lot. That's going to give yourself the opportunity to, be thoughtful and to, revise, refresh, and all of that. But I do think that, if you are giving yourself that time and energy to be able to apply to the top schools, it also gives you the time to really be thoughtful about what schools you might want to have on your backup list. No one is going to be a guaranteed admit at any of these highly selective schools. These are going to be
Yeah.
reaches for everyone. And so you need to be prepared for not being admitted to any of these schools. And so being able to be thoughtful about what schools you're going to put on that backup list, if you're not admitted to your first choice, if you're not admitted to that top list of schools that you've got, that's going to be key. I always recommend that students kind of take what I call the Amazon approach, the YouTube approach, rather than Miss America approach when it comes to finding good schools. Let's say that you have a list of, a handful of top programs. What you then want to do is figure out, what are the attributes of those top programs besides there being the top program? What are the attributes of why these top programs? What is it about, Harvard Business School or Stanford Graduate School of Business that resonate with me that, Chicago Booth or Penn Wharton, that those schools don't? And to understand what are those underlying attributes that resonate. So then you can look for, well, at the kind of next tier school, what are the schools that really over index on those attributes that I like? Just like when you're buying
Right.
stuff on Amazon, that it tells you that, hey, other people have purchased your product and they also purchase these other products. Or YouTube says, hey, you like watching this video. Well, you know what? People that like watching this video, they also like watching these next few videos that we might recommend. You want to be able to say, well, I'm thinking about applying to these schools. People who apply to these schools for the reasons that I have, they're also applying to these other schools. And so maybe I want to get those other. I think too many students take the Miss America approach where they start with like, the list of the top 100 schools and then they get rid of the ones that are like too urban, too rural, or too big, or too small, or they don't look good in the swimsuit, they can't answer that final question, they've got a bad tongue, and then they end up with like the list of like the top 5 or the top 10. Going through that pageant process with these schools, I find very unhelpful, as opposed to just figuring out, well,
Mhm.
what is it about these schools that I like, so that I'm able to find those attributes at the next set of schools.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that point of view because I think that there, like I talked about, there's so many schools, outside of the top 10 that are still fantastic, particularly for specific programs. And so understanding like what are the schools that are good for my programs, what are the schools that are good for the programs that I'm interested in, the cities that I'm interested in living in. I think that's a much better way to kind of do your shopping, as you put it. And the other part of it too is you have to do all of this before you can start to do the other things, like attending info sessions, meeting with alumni, etc. So it's important to like that's where having all this your first tip, right? Having lots of time is really important.
Hmm.
I mean, for most people, you only really get one graduate school, so pretty important that you do that. Like, put a lot of thought into your decision and your process for it.
That's right.
Great. Well, anything else that you wanted to cover on applying to top programs?
I think that's it. At the end of the day, the requirements are going to be the same. These schools don't have anything extra that they're looking for in terms of, they, need uh, a transcript, or they need test scores in a way that other schools don't. There's just maybe kind of the bar is raised, the expectation is higher, that the quality of what you send is higher. And so giving yourself that time to make sure that you do have that high quality to put forward, that's key.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Jayson Weingarten from Ivy Coach. Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free at achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.